All right, so in this video, we want to talk about chapters 11 through 15, which are a shorter reading, but still an important reading. A lot of important things happen within this, and a lot of just sort of internal epiphanies happen within these chapters. So, as we're thinking about A Brave New World, and particularly these chapters, it's really important that we don't even just think about the sort of plot, but also sort of that internal story that's going on. And that's one thing that we just want to think about as well in literature. That what we're doing is this aspect and this idea that there's two different stories going on in every story, and sort of plot reveals a lot of times, if there is a plot, reveals a lot of times what the internal ideas that are happening within the story. So it's a good idea as you read to just generally think of what's happening on the level and sort of what's going on underneath the skin of the story, and the internalization happening through the words of the story. So we left off in chapter 10 with the director, of course, being completely humiliated. So chapter 11 picks right up, right from where chapter 10 ended. And everyone in London knows about the director's humiliation and wants to meet John. Linda is completely ignored in a hospital on a 24-hour summer holiday. The doctor, Dr. Shaw, admits to John that this is probably going to cause her death in a month, since any sort of rejuvenation is impossible. John understands and has seen death before, so he accepts this. Although there are still some things that he'll have to come to terms with in a little bit as he watches her die. Um, Chapter 11 also lets us know that Bernard's ego is fed, you know, throughout all this enterprise. People are wanting to know him for the first time. People are trying to gain access to John. Women are just throwing themselves at his feet and want to get into his bed. And here we see that his early moralistic idea is completely pushed aside. The only thing left of Bernard really is his hypocrisy. So everyone in London fawns all over John because he is something new and different. He loses his name. People is now identifying him as the Savage, just as people are identified by their caste system in a Brave New World. Identity in this world, remember, is something that's assigned to a person. It's not what he or she is creating independently. So Linda is still an outcast in what was once her own society because she's old and ugly. She's distasteful, she's disgusting, and this seemingly perfect society won't accept her. Her son, however, John, is still young, strong, and beautiful, so he's desirable. And that tells us a lot just about the whole nature of what that society views as desirable. And it's very, very, very reflective of what I would consider modern Western society, as well as many places in the East as well. There's this real big contingent, especially with the bringing of sort of the visual elements and marketing and publication, and media, for this focus on what is young is beautiful. And that's a real thing that perhaps we as modern contemplatives and critical thinkers can reflect on, and how we perhaps are part of that consumeristic driven youth. It's something that's very important. Also, the assembly line scene in the Electrical Equipment Corporation, where John is looking at the adaptive Bokanovsky groups. This is really the first crack that he has in the New World, and he says the line from Shakespeare. It sort of sticks in his throat, and he has to vomit it out. He's recognizing that there's problems with this world. In chapter 11, also, Lenina likes the Savage, but she has no understanding of his standards of morality and his reasons for not wanting to go to bed with her. She likes him, so she wants to go to bed with him. He likes her, so he wants to not. And back in his room, after denying her, he chooses to read Othello. Um, Shakespeare's play about the Moor who kills his wife out of jealousy and passion because he wrongly believes that she's been unfaithful. So the big question here that John is debating inside of his mind is she the sweet virginal Juliet that John pictures, or sort of the horror of Othello's suspicions? John still sees her as the Juliet, which is interesting and ironic because it's still focusing on the masculine view or the male's view here of the female, just as in Othello, where Desdemona was absolutely innocent, if not just a little bit naive. But she was extremely innocent, and yet her role was not one where she could act out of herself. So it's sort of an interesting connection between the two here. In chapter 12, the euphoria that Bernard has been experiencing sort of comes crashing down around him as the savage's disillusionment with society also comes crashes down on him. So they sort of play this role of foil characters together and sort of think through, and you can compare the two as a reader. Um, all the important people at Bernard's reception come only to meet John. Lenina takes his refusal to appear as a sort of a personal comment on her and feels physically ill. And since she has never in her life felt any deep human emotion, except those that were chemically induced, she doesn't recognize these actual feelings that are happening inside of her. Lenina uses the name John and not Savage, but unlike Bernard, she actually means the use of the personal name. She cares about John as a person. The New World has not been successful in ridding its people of their emotions. It's very obvious that it can't do that. That you can't take drugs to get rid of how you're feeling. It just washes it away for a short amount of time. And so, these socially upsetting emotions are still at the base and they're still there. And so, Lenine is experiencing those for the first time. So in England, the Archbishop of Canterbury is the head of the Church of England, and he's the most influential person of the church. So the songster here is a parody of this office. He pontificates at Bernard as if Bernard was this unruly child or an unrepentant sinner, and then he sort of sweeps through the room with Lenina. So Bernard's deflated ego loses itself in the Soma dreams against which he had once said he wasn't going to do. And this is the realization that he's not the romantic, Byronic hero he had tried so hard to imagine himself to be. He's not really the rebel. He comes crashing down at the first wave of, antagonism. As soon as he thought he was accepted in society, he accepts everything, all of society's amenities, rather than seeing the reality of his position. Bernard reverts to his usual method of assigning blame to everyone else. Mostly, though, he puts it on John. And so, for all his criticism of society, Bernard really is probably the most superficial of all the characters inside the entire novel. Helmholtz and the Savage, John, are men who have found their solace in words. It's really for anybody that loves reading, and for us literature people, that we love this section of the novel. This sort of recognition of the importance of words and their roles. Oops, there, back in the lives of people. So it's words that have been their true friend, in the lives of these two outcasts, Helmholtz and John. And it's words that have also caused the most of their problems. So the idea of to create and enjoy words, one has to think, and thinking often takes one outside the accepted norm of society. It's only natural that words bridge the gap between these two worlds of these men, and that Bernard remain on the outside. In fact, Bernard is secretly happy that Helmholtz has had some issues and some things being said against him. When Bernard is miserable, he rejoices at somebody else's unhappy situation. Helmholtz is still, though, a product of his society and cannot go beyond Juliet's words to her mother to see the anguish of her situation. But he does understand that there needs to be a hurtful and upsetting situation to get people to realize the power in words. He just doesn't know what sort of situation would work in his world. And, this is a section of Huxley that I think is very much being played out in academics and in the media today. And I want to take just a second to sort of talk about it and commentary on it. Um, you know, there is absolutely no reason for you know ideas to be censored that are stupid. Censorship is not a place to be used under circumstances of any reason that doesn't actually, hurt people. And believe it or not, the negative, something that you disagree with, does not necessarily need to hurt you, and it shouldn't. There are definitely some horrible things that are said in life by some horrible people, and many of those people should probably think a lot more before they should talk. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be permitted to talk. Because underlining the idea of their own stupidity and the stupid things that they are saying, there is an important basic principle that people should be able to talk. And unfortunately, we no longer know how to dialogue well. It's all about winning the argument. It's all about getting people in trouble for saying something stupid. I would advise people to read works that they disagree with. I would advise people to go watch stand-up comedy, comedy that is pushing and asking for new limits to be thought about. Comedy does a really good job. Comedy is one area in the modern mainstream media where people can talk about absolutely abhorrent things that really make us think through some of the issues and ideas that are going on. A good joke isn't just funny, it's commentary. And that's really important to think about. So, this section about words really is just a beautiful section, and it's sad to see how true, in some ways, it has come to life. And Huxley's sort of idea of it, and where it would eventually go. In chapter 13, so of course, the chapter is the climax between John and Lenina, and it's the ultimate clash of their cultures and sort of their ingrained beliefs about life. John has been just as conditioned by his society and his Shakespeare as Lenina is by genetic engineering and hypnopaedia. The two can never understand each other. In reality, no woman can live up to John's highly romanticized ideal, nor live on the pedestal of his fantasy. There is no idea of the perfect woman. And strangely enough, this is still constantly seen in our culture, in our society. Looking at magazines, looking at things. We say beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but yeah, we don't live that out in any form. And we're not talking about the idea of what color hair is or things like this, but this constant, nonstop fascination with trying to create this idealized version of somebody else rather than maybe internally working on ourselves. So what John has become is he's become Pygmalion. And Pygmalion, for those of you that don't know, was this Greek sculptor who made a statue of the perfect woman. And a goddess breathed life into her, and she became the sculptor's perfect wife. But John's perfect woman in Lenina is an illusion. This idea Pygmalion falls in love with something that is sort of an illusion, is not completely real. Um, and that idea ultimately does not bring him satisfaction. Anybody who is a perfectionist can tell you there is ultimately at the end of that line not a fulfilling sense to it. Fulfilling sense is giving it your all but letting it go once the time comes, doing the best you can, but the recognition that everything that you do and touch is still going to be finite and imperfect to some degree. In chapter 14, John's reaction to Linda's dying and her death is very normal. The concern, the sadness, the pain. However, to the world he's chosen to enter, sort of this world of his dreams, he's an oddity to be scorned. The fact that he cares about what's going on with her is really, surprising to the nurse. Uh, yeah, so she's surprised by that, and then his statement, "She's my mother," then she literally just flips out. So, no surprise there, though. So at first, the only memories as he's sitting there with Linda, the Savage has of his mother are loving ones. He recalls the strange mixture of songs and stories, the way she painted the other place is perfect, and he's seen the ugly imperfections. And then it suddenly crashes in on his private moment as sort of this horde of Delta twins crowd around him. Once again, the two societies are clashing. The children are only following their own conditioning as the Savage is following his. Our sympathy probably lies with him, and the children seem rude and intrusive. In one way, though, they are being normal children, curious and unaware of the situation and the emotion involved. Nowhere is any kind of afterlife mentioned. A person lives and a person dies. Um, Enjoyment, pleasure during life is everything to both John and to the perfect world. Dead bodies are sort of this recyclable element to be cremated, and in death, they still become a benefit to society. And for Lanina, it's the way that they can fly over a big building because of their cremation smoke. So the final insult and rejection is when Linda calls her own son Pape. Her son has become the intruder, again, the unwanted one. All his mother wants is the pleasure of the moment. Now, it is anger that fills him, and he grabs and he shakes his mother, and this action sort of adds to his feelings of guilt. He still carries lots of guilt over his attraction to Lenina, and so he's misplacing that guilt and suggests that he causes Linda's death. Now, the shaking does kill her, but I mean, she was already dying, so he's not at fault for her death. Um, so John is in a place where his relationship with Bernard is a sham. Lenina has become this sort of idealized person who is really just this wanton whore in his perspective. Helmholtz has laughed at the human situation in Shakespeare's play. Linda dies with the name of Pape on her lips. He has no one and no place to go. So in his mind, everyone is slaves, and it's his duty to free them. His passion, his naivety have made him forget that the Delta twins simply don't have the basic intelligence to understand what he's talking about, and they're only disturbed by the upheaval in their orderly world. And so he's willing to go about and make sure that there should be this massive disturbance, this sort of ingrained, huge disturbance, rioting disturbance. And so it's he does this causes this massive disturbance, and it's very interesting. If this new world is so perfect, why are riot police fitted with gas masks, summer spray, and anesthetics so quickly? And why is it so easily available? The riot police are sort of ever alert to quash the least bit of rebellion and to drug away any threat of stability. So once in a drugged and receptive mood, the hypnopathic voice of reason latches into previous conditioning and all is subdued until the next time. Nothing of these episodes is ever made public, and others sort of blissfully continue their lives. All seems to end quietly, but simply this is the lull before the storm happening as we get near to the end of our book. So that's really what we see happening in chapters 11 through 15. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope it made sense. Just a very brief summary of what's going on and sort of an analysis of that.